All right, good morning. Boy, I hear people talk about my bio. It makes me sound way more important than I think that I am sometimes. So first let me say thanks for inviting the National Science Foundation and me in particular to come up here and talk at the university. For those with a keen ear, you may be able to tell that I am not from New York. I am actually from the great state of Tennessee. And so sometimes I may lapse into strange euphemisms or ways of talking. And so if I do say something that sounds odd, just raise your hand and I will try to revert to the educated way of speaking that all of my professors beat into me over the years. My wife is in the back too, so she'll flag it as well, I think. So I get the privilege, I think, to talk to you today about international science cooperation and specifically the future of it. There's a wide range of experts sitting down in these reserved seats right here, and so I think what's going to be really interesting is to hear kind of how we reinforce the same message over the rest of today. And I think that, please take the opportunity to talk to us about our different perspectives. I'm certainly going to spend most of my time talking today probably about science and engineering in the global landscape from the perspective of the United States government. And I'll kind of meld in the things that I've learned over my past 15 years in government. Just by way of background, so I was in graduate school when 9/11 happened, and I heard the call to service. So while I was on a track to enter either the pharmaceutical industry or academics, I think that's what my professor wanted actually, I chose instead to go into government service and then do all the things that John talked to you about. So I haven't actually done research in probably the better part of 15 years, but what I have done is kind of taken a very tortuous path to become a science diplomat, not unlike my colleagues down here in the second row. And so the perspective that I'm going to give you is probably one that's a little bit nuanced because there aren't a lot of us that are running around here in the United States or globally, to be honest with you. So this is New York, so I'm going to maybe start with the bottom line up front. So down south, we kind of, talk slow and build to the point quick, very slowly. Here, I'm going to start with my conclusions, and then I'll kind of work backwards from there. So I think that will be appreciated by this audience in a way perhaps that people from my hometown might not appreciate. So let's talk about it. The future of science is international, and the future landscape is going to be more complex than it is today. And let's be candid, it's pretty complex right now. I expect that the demand for economic outcomes from government-funded research to increase. It's consistent with the global trends that we're seeing across the globe, not only with the ministries of science and education, but ministries of economy, trade, industry. That's what we see when we talk to our counterparts across the international landscape. I think that STEM practitioners, whether you're in academia, in industry, or government, are going to have to be more internationally minded. You're going to have to be mobile. You're going to have to be able to work with your international colleagues. And in all honesty, for those that probably engage in research itself, you're going to have to be comfortable working at foreign locations. And I think that especially for many people here in the United States, that's going to be a pretty big sea change for the way that careers have traditionally been. I expect that the demand for government dollars to continue to outstrip supply. And I'll talk about that a little bit more, I think, when I talk about the NSF's budget, and then when my colleagues here, I think, talk about the budgets in their countries. And then lastly, I think that science agencies such as the National Science Foundation, but independent really of any nation you look at, are slowly but surely going to change how they operate. So I think that the way that we've done business, that is our business model of the past, has to change. And so I'll talk a little bit, I think, about where I think that it's going, recognizing that future prognostication usually has a low success rate. So let me talk to you a little bit about how I got to these conclusions. So as John mentioned, I'm the Deputy Director in the Office of International Science and Engineering at the National Science Foundation. I spend a lot of my time, maybe when I'm not working on budget stuff, I spend a lot of my time thinking about the world that we live in, and then I spend a lot of time thinking about the world as it's going to be. So I take all of this different information and I try to figure out where is this thing that is science going, and then try to predict what's going to happen so that I can ensure that the United States continues to have access to the best minds, the best facilities, and locations to do science. This is, I think, very important for agencies such as ours because of the global changing landscape. Success for me is not measured in terms of awards provided or research accomplishments of the PIs within my portfolio. It's really measured in terms qualitatively of relationships. So not only do we have the relationships that we need today for success, but more importantly for me, 5, 10 years from now, do we, the United States, have the relationships needed to continue the science enterprise as it currently is? my mission, my personal mission and that of my office is to ensure that in a multipolar world, even more so than today, that the United States is not only a participant, but a leader in areas of national importance. And I want to put a very fine point on that, because I think that in years gone by, the United States, maybe by design, maybe by serendipity, led in a lot of different disciplines. And I think that that's going to change as we go forward. And so kind of being more strategic about where we want to be leaders and where we want to seed leadership is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. I'll spend the next 20 minutes or so, maybe 30 if I talk really slow like a Southerner, talking about the changing global landscape of research and development and why I care about it. I'm going to talk about 4 themes. I'm going to talk at the very macro level. So I'm going to talk about the global science and engineering enterprise as it currently stands today. Then I'm going to start drilling down and get into some micro issues. So I'll talk a little about U.S. science and engineering. I'll talk about the National Science Foundation and where we are within the U.S. enterprise. And then lastly, I'll talk about where you can get some money. Because I would say that almost universally, every time I give a talk, most of the questions I get are, so what funding opportunities are available? So I won't leave you hanging too much, but I will include that at the end. And then certainly you can catch me during the rest of the day to talk about that more. So here's what I hope to leave you with. The future of U.S. science and engineering is not in the hands of people like me. It's in the hands of people like you, because you are on the front lines of building the relationships, doing the science, and making sure that the enterprise continues to move forward. I'm just here to try to help you as best I can do it. So let's talk a little bit about the macro. And let me say this too, you're not going to see any slides. So when I was at the State Department, what they beat out of me was no slides. So I do apologize if people wanted to see pretty graphs, but I've left some behind for John to share with people, but I intend to kind of give a talk just like this. So let's talk about the global science and engineering or research and development enterprise. R&D is probably a little bit more inclusive than science and engineering, and so I'm going to talk to you about that because I think that it's important to understand the landscape where all of you exist, even if maybe like John was saying at the beginning, you might be in a cave just looking up at the cave roof at this exact moment in time. The global enterprise is everything from discovery, that's basic science, all the way to market release of a product, assuming that a product can originate with a basic science discovery. It includes monetary investments at the national, at the corporate level, even things at the university level. It includes, very importantly, the policy issues that governments are advocating and changing, both at a national and international level. And then it includes the human capital component. So I'm going to talk about all 3 of those things for a little bit. So where are we right now? I'm going to start throwing out a lot of hard data. This data comes from the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, the National Science Foundation Science and Engineering Indicators, and then some government sites that we've kind of pulled together. Oh, thank you, that's good, because I'm probably going to get a little dry mouth here in a minute. So let's talk about money. So one of the first things that they taught me in my Stanford classes recently was that cash is king, and so I will defer to that and start where it all begins, and that's money. So in 2017, global R&D expenditures are expected to top $2.07 trillion. So that's everybody rolled up together. Of those dollars, the U.S. is expected to contribute about $528 billion of it. So that's a pretty significant amount. That amount represents about 2.8% of the United States gross domestic product. So that's a good indicator. Most governments, at least in the advanced economies, are trying to hit targets of around 3%, and so the United States is close to that. As a proportion of global expenditures, let me move that over, the U.S. accounts for about 27.7%. So we're a little bit over a quarter of all global R&D. We have been since pretty much the end of the World War II. And behind us comes China and then the European Union. So those are kind of the big 3 players on the global landscape in terms of research and development. You might ask, why in the world am I worried about the future then if the U.S.'s market share is nearly a quarter of the global market? And the reality is that that's just a snapshot in time. If you actually look back at all, what you'll see is that the global landscape is changing and the U.S.'s market share of global R&D is slowly diminishing. Since 2015, the U.S.'s share has dropped 0.3%. The European Union's has dropped 0.8%. Contrast that to China, whose global market share has increased by 1.4%. So if you look across the globe, what you see is that the traditional powers in science and engineering are on a slow decline in terms of absolute dollars, and countries in the Asia-Pacific region are slowly but surely growing. I don't expect these trends to actually change. I expect them actually to accelerate given current monetary decisions that are being made at the national level. While we expect the United States to continue to be a dominant force in the global market share, it's not inconceivable that over the coming decades we will not be the #1 investor globally. And at the same time, on the policy landscape, it's not inconceivable. In fact, I would say it's highly likely that the U.S. will no longer be the largest and loudest voice when it comes to science policy outcomes. I notice in many of the multilaterals that I sit in, at the OECD, at APEC, at ASEAN, that other countries are beginning to advocate for positions that are not contrary to that of the United States, but that are nuanced. And the reality is that over time, I think that we're going to have to find certain accords that maybe in the past we did not. One point I'd really like to talk about, too, is this kind of the policy landscape for a minute. So nations invest in science for any number of reasons. There's kind of the altruistic thinking, the blue skies thinking, which we heard described, I think, a few minutes ago, right, which is science and the expansion of knowledge is intrinsically valuable to all of humankind. But there's also things like creating a more informed citizenry. And then there's certainly economic growth and job creation. And I think these last two are really important to note, because over the past 10 to 20 years, what we have seen is that more and more countries are focusing on economic growth and job outcomes when they think about science. You can see that in the way that it is conveyed in terms of political language, and more importantly, you can see the way that it is conveyed when legislatures and parliaments actually begin to fund ministries and research institutions. You'll hear the words innovation a lot. You'll hear the words tech transfer a lot. And that's really, I think, where the political landscape is changing. I think it's worth noting because this is a subtle but very powerful shift in how elected leaders view science. A perspective at that level that is more driven by economic outcomes is going to favor science and engineering research that leads to them. And as we're seeing this shift not only in the advanced economies, but we're seeing that also in a lot of the low and middle income countries as well. They want to invest in science and engineering not for these altruistic reasons, but to drive economic growth. And I think that that's going to be a very powerful change for the way that our kind of portion of society operates. I think that more and more what you're going to see at the political level is that science and engineering is seen through a transactional lens. I think that you're going to see that politicians want to see tangible outcomes on shorter time horizons, and I think that that's going to change the types of funding that agencies such as mine receive. So let me talk to you now a little bit about another area that we look at when we think about the global R&D landscape. So cash is king. I've checked that box off. I've talked about policy a little bit. Now let me talk a little bit about human capital. So in the year 2000, the United States awarded about 483,000 bachelor's degrees in science and engineering. In the same year, the top 8 EU member states awarded 548,000. Japan, 353,000, and China, 359,000. So that's about 18 years ago. Fast forward to 2014 when we have some really hard data still. The US is up to 742,000, the top 8 EU member states, 780. Japan down a little bit to 316, and get ready for it, China is up to 1.65 million science and engineering degrees at the bachelor's level. Let me focus on that because that's a big driver for the global R&D landscape. Between 2000 and 2014, the number of bachelor's degrees awarded in China increased by 300%, significantly outstripping growth here in the United States and in the European Union. During that same period, I would note that their output of non-science and engineering degrees rose by almost 1,200%. So these changes are a clear indication of what national policy can do not only for one's citizenry, but for the global landscape in which we all live. China's decision to educate its workforce is changing the demographics not only at the national and regional level, but the international one as well. If we expect these trends to continue, and there's no reason to think that they won't, then what we're going to see is that competition in the STEM workforce is going to continue to increase. It's unclear if there's going to be enough jobs for all these workers and what they are trained in. Certainly people like me, so I'm a chemist by training, didn't end up in chemistry, right? I'm one of those alternative career path folks. But the reality is that the message that we have been saying that people such as myself might be the aberration are in fact probably going to become the norm. Just last week, the New York Times, on November 1st, the New York Times posted an article, right, looking at a number of different science and engineering fields. Every field had more people trained than there were jobs, with the exception of one, computer science. So if you're a computer science, it's looking pretty good. If you're not, it depends. It might not be looking so hot. So, and I don't think that I suspect that most people in this audience are faculty members, and I don't think that's probably any surprise to you. I know that when I was coming out of graduate school, there were at least probably 4 to 6 applicants for every tenure track faculty position. I know that that has only increased over the past 15 years, and that it's probably not going to change. That is, it's not going to become a better ratio. So for this reason, I think that the workforce that students are entering is going to be more competitive. At the same time, I do expect it to be a more diverse workforce. So as more nations begin to invest in education, I think that you're going to see a more globally diverse workforce that really is available for both academic, private sector, and government organizations to kind of pull from. From the United States perspective, I should say that we're not really worried about this a lot right now, but we're certainly trying to divine the future. The United States remains the destination of choice for internationally mobile science and technology, or science and engineering students. About 3.5% of our student base, by the way, is internationally mobile, whereas if you look to the Asia-Pacific countries, over 40% are. So we have a lot of people that are still coming in. International students, accounted for a considerable increase in the total number of students in our education system over the past 15 years, and that's expected to increase as well. Now, I will say that one of the markers of maybe potential concern is that if we look globally at where all students are going, that the U.S. market share in education is dropping. So in 2000, about 25% of all internationally mobile science and engineering students came to the United States. By 2015, that dropped to 19%. So there's more competition for students, even at these bachelor's levels. So let's talk a little bit more about graduate students. So that might be more applicable to some of the folks here in the audience. So graduate education is where the United States and the European Union continue to shine. Unlike the bachelor's degrees, our two kind of regions continue to focus or develop most of the doctoral students. In 2014, about 40,000 science and engineering doctoral degrees were awarded here in the United States, 58,000 in the EU. And that's an increase from 2000, from 20,000 for the United States and 36,000 for the EU. But once again, there's a new player on the field with us, and that's China. So if we look back to China over these same levels, we saw that in the year 2000, they awarded 2,000 science and engineering doctoral degrees. In 2015, that jumped to 34,000. So once again, we see a massive increase from a different region, and that's going to change the demography of the global workforce. Just like with the monetary data, these sorts of changes in the degrees awarded are indicative of how decisions at the national level lead to international repercussions. Now, for the United States, as I said, this isn't a big issue. We continue to retain a large number of the doctoral students that come here. In 2014, for example, more than a third, that is 37% of all doctoral students here in the United States came from outside of the United States. And since 2000, we've seen an overall increase in the number of those students, mostly from China and India. We have traditionally retained about 60% of those people into our workforce. And so if those trends continue, that is good for us in the long term. But the overall increasing number is something to think about, especially as job creation in these fields may be uncertain. Now, I've kind of talked a little bit about the global R&D landscape. Let me drill down a little bit on where the U.S. is. Talk a little bit about our research and development enterprise. We'll go down to the National Science Foundation for a few minutes, and then I'll tell you how you can get some money out of us. So when I think about the United States research and development enterprise, what you'll hear a lot of people talk about is an innovation ecosystem. And that is not just the science and engineering component, but it's actually the laws, that kind of underpinned it, everything from bankruptcy laws to intellectual property rights. Right? The Bayh-Dole Act of 1980 was a major sea change for the U.S. government in terms of transferring intellectual property from the hands of the government to that of the institutions and the individual investigators. If we look at global R&D, or the U.S.'s R&D kind of portfolio, in 2015, the total R&D enterprise accounted for about $499 billion. Of that amount, the United States government was responsible for about $131 billion of it. So while the government funds approximately a quarter of all R&D in the United States, it funds over 45% of all of the basic research. That is mostly conducted by universities here in the United States, as well as in partnership with others. Now, I'll talk a little bit further about how money might be paired with other countries in a moment. But you might ask, well, why is that important? So here's how I look at it, and I'll give you a perspective that maybe is a little different since I have not been in the academic world for a long time. Basic science, I think we can all agree, is about discovery. It's about blue skies. It's about thinking about what could be and then going and figuring out if that's true. But basic science is also, at a national level, about risk. Most of us in this room are scientists, or people like me were once scientists. And as I think back to the experiments that I once conducted, I can say that more often than not, my experiments failed. And I learned from it and I moved on. But that if it was a guaranteed sort of activity, I wouldn't have been investigating it. So governments invest in basic research, as I said, in part for knowledge generation, but at a very strategic level, this investment serves as a de-risking strategy. The government can assume the risk for some of the craziest ideas with payouts that may be 10, 20, 30 years or more in the future. And that allows our private sector to focus their energies on the applied and the development sort of portions of the cycle. If you look down the pipeline, what you see is if the government funds about 45% of all basic research, private sector funds about 50% of all applied and over 80% of all development. And so if you look kind of at this sort of activity, government and industry partnership and government funding of basic science is actually a major driver, not only for our economy, but for others. Government R&D, as I said, in the United States is about 24%. That's similar to South Korea. If you look at the United Kingdom, Germany, or France, they fund between 28 and 35% of their total national R&D. And in Russia, it's over 70%. So this strategy is actually relatively common. However, it's not what it once was. So if we look back at the post-recession era, 2010 to 2015, what we see is that the share of U.S. research and development funded by the federal government declined from 31 to 24%. Let's see here. And so that's, let's see. Well, my apologies, I can't follow. Here we go. And this accounts for not only changes in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, but also the uncertain federal landscape that we find ourselves, including the budget caps, which, if you read the paper at all, continue to be a discussion up at our legislature. This decline is important, not only for the United States, but for the international community, because it affects the amount of science that we can fund. It affects the number of people that we can enter into cooperation with, and it also affects our overall market share. Competition for great ideas, great people, and new facilities is going to continue to build. And at the same time that other governments are increasing their investments, like China, or focusing their investments, like some of the countries in the EU or in the Asia-Pacific region, right? Trends in U.S. basic research funding, if they keep going, will mean that our national de-risking strategy won't keep up. That means that the next great breakthroughs might occur elsewhere, and that the economic outcome from those breakthroughs might be realized elsewhere. So now let me talk about what we're going to do about it. I'm not trying to paint a bleak picture of the future, but just a realistic one. At the National Science Foundation, we're here to try to make sure that U.S. science leadership continues in the areas that we're interested in. Let me talk about the NSF for those that might not know, by the way, just a quick background. So the NSF is one of what I call the big six in the U.S. government. That is, the six organizations, the Departments of Agriculture, Energy, Health and Human Services, primarily the National Institutes of Health, Energy, NASA, the National Aeronautics Space Administration, and then the NSF account for the lion's share of the basic research and development dollars here in the United States. What makes the NSF a little bit different than the other agencies is that we are almost exclusively on basic science. We have a tiny amount of our budget that goes to funding collaboration with research partners. I'm happy to talk with people offline about that, but the vast majority of our money goes to basic science conducted here and around the rest of the United States. So we have 7 research and engineering directorates that cover all disciplines. We don't fund human health, so that's the NIH's job. And we return 93% of the dollars that we are appropriated to institutions here in the United States. So we have an overhead rate on average between 6 and 7%. We don't fund overseas investigators, right? So all of our principal investigators are here in the United States. Our money stays domestically, even though we do partner. And with a little over about 2,000 people in our new building, and if you didn't know, we recently moved about 8 weeks ago, we employ one of the most technically diverse and technically competent workforces in the United States government, to include people maybe who aren't technically competent, like me. People like me, though, do represent your interest and that of the U.S. science community to our elected leadership, to the interagency process that is typically coordinated through the National Science and Technology Council, and to our international partners who are represented down here below, as well as overseas. All of our proposals are peer-reviewed. All of our awards are publicly available. That makes us different than a fair number of other organizations around the globe. So let me tell you about what we're doing to address the changes in the landscape. We're going to adapt to the world in which we find ourselves. So I'm not a biologist, but what all of my biologist colleagues tell me is that selective pressure has a very strong influence on making organisms change, right, or selecting them out. And even at a level such as an agency such as the NSF, you can feel selective pressure being applied. So we're going to experiment with some new ways of doing business. We're going to seek some new partnerships. As I said at the beginning, my job is to look over the horizon a little bit and make sure we are positioned where we want to be, not just where we are. In 2016, we announced 10 new big science ideas. The director rolled them out. There was a lot of press, I think, in Science and Nature about them. They included topics such as multi-messenger astrophysics, navigating the new Arctic, convergence, as well as harnessing the data revolution. These sorts of large, grand challenges at really an agency level is something new for us and complements our traditional bottom-up sort of strategy in identifying the best science. Each of the big ideas includes a component for international collaboration. What that will actually end up being is up for negotiation, not only at the PI level, but at the institutional and national level. But we are open to the possibility that we can learn as much from others as others can learn from us. Just a few months ago, in fact, we released our first Dear Colleague letter on convergence research, and I expect in the coming years you'll see other Dear Colleague letters and solicitations focused on these big ideas. Furthermore, offices such as mine are actually undergoing more radical changes. So as John said, I showed up about 18 months ago from the Department of State into the National Science Foundation. And when I showed up in my office, we had 7 different teams and 9 different programs. In the past 18 months since I've been there, we have consolidated from 7 teams into 3. We've consolidated from 9 programs into 3. We're streamlining what we do, and we're trying to be more strategic about what we invest in. As part of our reorganization, and this is where you'll want to start paying attention because it talks about money, so where you can get money from us. Our 3 programs that are going to go on are one that we've had for a little while, which my colleague from the Netherlands mentioned, our Partnerships in International Research and Education, our PIRE program. PIRE is our largest program. We have 19 international agreements within PIRE. That is, 19 different countries have agreed to sign on to it. And every other year, we open a solicitation up where we get hundreds of pre-proposals, and then moving on to the proposal phase, less than 100 or so that go through the final full merit review. PIRE is really important for our office because it's actually a cost share sort of mechanism for the U.S. government. For every dollar that I invested in PIRE this year, I received $2 from foreign organizations. And so I think this is one of the changes that you're going to slowly see across not only the foundation but others as well, is that we're going to look for cost-sharing opportunities, leveraging other people's research. We also just released a modification to one of our research education, one of our education sort of opportunity programs. My apologies for spitting this out incorrectly. The International Research Experience for Students program. So 2 weeks ago, we had a new solicitation that just came out, and IRIS kind of gets to the to the scientific workforce issue that I talked about at the beginning. That is, we hope to vertically integrate undergraduates, graduates, and postdoctoral students through this program so that they are prepared not only for academic careers, but to work efficiently and effectively in the international global environment in which we find ourselves. And then our last program, which is something that's kind of in the RFI phase, is we call it AccelNet. It's Accelerating International Cooperation Through Network-to-Network Research. So AccelNet seeks to leverage great investments overseas and to build relationships, not fund research. And so right now what we have open is an opportunity for anyone and everyone in the United States to submit ideas to us on topics that they think might be ripe. Not something that's already established, right, but something that could be in another couple of years. While we don't guarantee that there will be funding for all of these ideas, there's a very real possibility that through this program, new programs will emerge. And so if you have ideas, right, where you understand that there's an opportunity, especially with a nascent international network, I'd encourage you to kind of look into the NSF program base for the AccelNet and submit your white paper. We'll go through all of them in the next couple of months and then have some more information next spring about what made it through. So let me kind of move toward the end, I think, as I see that I'm almost out of time, and make a personal plea to each of you. So I've been up here pontificating, right, for the better part of 30 minutes, and I know that at times my sonorous voice can cause people to drone, to nod off. But I want to make a personal plea to all of you about shaping the future. As I said, it's not really in my hands, it's in yours. What I want you to think about is if you're not already partnering with international experts, that you start doing so. Monies are going to be more competitive, as I said, both here domestically. So if you can find other alternative funding mechanisms, that is surely going to be a career booster for you. The person who follows me will talk about the EU system, the EU programs that are available, things like Horizon 2020, which will eventually become what is Framework Program 9, is a great opportunity for U.S. investigators to partner with their colleagues through the EU. I also want to ask the professors, if you're not already thinking about this, to entertain the idea to let your students go overseas for an international experience. It's not only going to benefit them in terms of the research, but I think it will help them with many of the soft skills they need. When I was in graduate school, it's a lot longer now than I think it is, right? There was no way that I was ever leaving my laser lab. And I think that was okay back then. But I think looking forward, that if you have not thought about it, really thinking about giving them these opportunities to go do research, to have an experience with cohorts that are different than themselves will be really beneficial. I think the last thing, too, is I'd ask you to communicate with people such as myself more. So I live in Washington, D.C. Information does flow into the Capitol, but it is based largely upon what people are willing to push to us. If you see things that are great opportunities, if you see things that maybe aren't working so great, let people like me know so that we can shape the policy environment that we live in. As John mentioned, as a career member of the Senior Executive Service, my job is primarily to provide advice to political appointees and elected officials. And I can give them better advice when I have on-the-ground information from individuals such as you. It's really only through your help that the future of U.S. science and engineering and leadership continues. For many, many decades, the U.S. has been a very good host to some of the greatest and brightest minds that the world has to offer. And as I look forward in time, I think that we are going to have to learn how to be some gracious guests in other people's countries and in other people's facilities. So with that, I will end my talk and thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, time permitting, I'm happy to answer them.
We'll take a few questions, okay? Let me just make a few comments. Okay, I just want to appreciate you for doing an excellent presentation in 30 minutes. Not only did you cover the global landscape, but you covered funding opportunities, It's quite, for a Southerner, you actually speak quite quickly. I appreciate that. So what we're going to do is take a few questions, and then 2 or 3 questions, and then we'll move on. Anybody? Yes.
So, is there any articulation?
Can you go to the microphone?
Andrei Gitiano, Liman College. So, I have a question. It's any articulation between NSF and 2020 program? Will be there? It's any perspective?
So let me see if I understand the question. Is there any formal relationship between
Yes.
the NSF and
Correct.
Horizon 2020?
Exactly.
No, there's no formal agreement between the two. So I will say that that within the past year, the U.S. government, so that's not the National Science Foundation, but at a more strategic level, the U.S. government has signed a new implementing arrangement for Horizon 2020 that will facilitate greater participation by U.S. investigators in it. There were a few hiccups, I think, earlier in this decade just due to legal matters, but those have been resolved, and our understanding is that there's more opportunity for cooperation. I will say at a policy level, we have been engaging with our EU counterparts to make sure that the gains that we have recently seen under the H2020 framework will be carried over into Framework Program 9, so I'm actually quite optimistic that the future of U.S.-EU collaboration in particular will actually increase.
Thank you very much.
Hi, good morning. This is Monica Seekin from Bronx Community College. I was just keen, is there any program in place at NSF in the international research where community college students could be part of international research? And my research is an international collaboration, so what is the best way to bring them into the picture?
I did not.
So I will say one of the challenges is all the speakers are pointing that way, so all I can hear is an echo.
All right. Okay. This is Monica Seekin from Bronx Community College. I was asking if you have any program in NSF which is targeting specifically community college students. My research is in collaboration with international experts, and I would like to see which is the right place for me to involve the students in this international experience.
Okay, so we have, I'm trying to think, I don't think that there's anything active that is specific for community colleges. I will say that all of our programs are open really to any accredited institution, and so there are some that do get maybe preferential sort of scoring due to legislative guidance, such as the historically black colleges and universities, but even IRIS is open to a lot of pretty much anyone. So the reality, so nothing specific for community colleges that come to mind. Let me look to make sure that something hasn't changed recently, and then I can let John know, and he can let you know.
Thank you.
Yes. You identify yourself and the institution you're from.
Sure. My name is Delaram Kahrabai. I'm a computer scientist and data scientist here at the Graduate Center and New York City College of Technology. My research is mainly on information security and data science, and I have collaboration with University of Sorbonne in France. And I looked into PIRE, P-I-R-E, during summer to write a research proposal, but apparently it was not active. So I was wondering, you know, when this call will be open again, and also if you have a special topic that you're willing to fund.
So PIRE is a biennial program, so you just missed it, unfortunately. It'll reopen probably in 19 or 20, fiscal year 19 or 20. We have traditionally let PIRE, we are topic agnostic, so it funds it solicits information from every discipline that the NSF funds. And so no matter the idea, we'll take it. Now I will say that one of the challenges perhaps that PIs find with PIRE is that because the demand can be so great, we limit the number of proposals from each institution to one. So there is usually an internal competition at universities that is the first down select before it even gets to us. But as just a matter of policy, we throw the gates wide open and see what comes in.
And you mentioned about two other opportunity, Accelerator?
Yeah, so ExcelNet and IRIS are our two active programs from my office, though international opportunities exist across the rest of the foundation as well. And so if you go to research.gov, or can't remember where else it's posted, there are a couple of different ways posted, you can actually search for all the different international opportunities that currently exist at the NSF.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Shubhendra Sarkar from City Tech. That is one of the technical college here under CUNY umbrella. I'm a physicist, chemist, and medical scientist, and I'm a teacher. Over last 20 years, as I'm working with many fields, I have noticed that the undergraduate students' science background is declining very fast in this country. Their respect and attraction toward computer science and other lucrative fields is so much that they are neglecting basic science. And the disease have also gone into the teachers group. Most of the talented teachers are also running after IT and computer related fields. So the basic science teachers are really fast decreasing in their quality and quantity. Although there are a lot of graduates coming up, but their respect and dedication to basic science is far low now compared to 20 or 30 years ago or 200 years ago. So that is the US scenario. I'm sure it is happening in India and China because I keep close tie with both the countries. Basic respect for the science foundation is low, and probably it will continue. Question is, how will the world move forward if I'm right? I'm sure you all know the answer. It will not move. What is the cure? And am I wrong?
So let me first caveat by saying I don't have any hard data on those sorts of things, on what you described. I think that anecdotally, what most of us at least sense is that there has been a shift in terms of how science is perceived by society. In fact, this was an issue brought forth at the recent G7 Science Ministerial by the Italians who were chairing it this year. I take a step back and I look at it in terms of just kind of a market-driven sort of approach, right? So I look at people who were in heavily quantitative fields with me when I was in school, physics, chemistry, math, and those sorts of things. And what I observed, at least through my cohort, was a lot of those people ended up in the financial sector or other areas, right, where the compensation is much greater. I think the challenge that we as a scientific group face is that there are changes in the way that science is perceived, and there are also market forces, right, which we are caught up in as well. I'll give you an example. I was talking with a Stanford computer science professor about a year ago who said that the vast majority of his graduate students were not U.S. citizens, and the reason why was because the U.S.-born students, once they received their bachelor's degree from Stanford in computer science, were immediately offered $250,000 or more from Google or any other of the big Silicon Valley sort of companies. They didn't want to take a $60,000 or less, in some instances, graduate fellowship. And while that has effects on their long-term career trajectory, right, so they're not going to move into upper management as fast as somebody that gets an MS or a PhD, the reality is that $250,000 looks pretty enticing. Now, so that's one of the fields where there's a great, I think, demand for people at the bachelor's and the graduate level. But I do think that globally, I mean, the reality is, and I don't know how much all of you make in terms of your salary, but my guess is that for people especially whose fields align to a well-developed industry, the reality is that you have probably chosen your career not based upon the financial outcomes of your decision, but for other perhaps more altruistic reasons. Thank you on behalf of a grateful nation, by the way. But I think that what you have pointed out is something that not only we wrestle with, but that I hear also come up a lot in the OECD context as well, right? Which is that we scientists think of ourselves in a certain way, and society now thinks a little bit differently about us. And how do we fix that? Well, one of the things you can start doing is start talking to people who aren't like you. So we are, we're really good at communicating with one another, but talk to people who don't have a science and engineering background and talk to them in a way that they can understand. Because, you know, polysyllabic words and, God forbid, math equations tend to make people's eyes glaze over, right? And I'd put myself probably in that category, in all honesty.
I think we'll take two more, and that'll be it.
Thank you very much. My name is Sarwar from Kingsborough Community College. I'm the director for biotechnology program there. I just wanted from Samuel to hear a little bit more the funding opportunities for international collaboration in the field of biotechnology, because some of the things we alone cannot do it because there are some experience outside. So what kind of limit that we have? I was just a little confused when you said almost all the funds are within the United States, and so I would like you to expand that. Thanks.
So, I mean, so biotechnology is kind of an interesting sort of field to be working in, right? So we fund biological research at the National Science Foundation through our Biological Sciences Directorate. And if you were to look at kind of the Dear Colleague letters and the solicitations that they have put forward, that would give you an idea of what they're funding. I can say one of the big ideas for biosciences was what they call rules of life, which is trying to link genotypic information to phenotypic expression. And so a lot of the research there, which is basic in nature, is what they are focusing on right now. Biotechnology also gets funded through Health and Human Services, and so not only the National Institutes of Health, but you look at organizations such as BARDA or some of the other research and development agencies within HHS actually have monies that are probably more aligned to to that place in intellectual space where basic research dovetails with some sort of commercial activity, and I'm happy to talk with you offline to kind of give you the name of some of those organizations to kind of look up and see what they're soliciting at this point in time.
One more question. We'll do this one. And then
I have a very brief question. So we have maybe two. Alexander Vaninsky from Howerton Community College. My question is this: do you accept proposals in the field of macroeconomics, or you are restricted to natural sciences?
In macroeconomics or just economics in general?
Macroeconomics.
So we do have we do fund some economics research, but so that is not a field that I'm as well familiar with. So let me ask one of my experts. I can email them at the end of this and get you a clearer answer.
Whom can I contact?
So
is it you?
Yep. So I'll go back and ask some of my folks here at the break, and hopefully I'll get an answer by the end of the day, and I can either give it to you directly or I can send it to John. As you might imagine, so the NSF gets about 50,000 proposals a year. We award about 11,000. While I'd like to say I'm expert in all the fields that we solicit for, I'm not. That's a secret. Don't tell anybody. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Okay.
So I think we need to move on. I'd like to invite our next presenter, Viktoria Bodnarova. I think I pronounced it correctly. She's the regional rep for EURAXESS North America, responsible for Canada and the US. Her main role is to inform the community of researchers of all scientific domains and nationalities based in North America about the funding and career opportunities in the European research area. Another important role is the management of this European Scientific Diasporas in North America initiative, together with the EU delegations in the EU member states and associated countries. Prior to her position in the US, she was project manager and EURAS network coordinator at the Academy of Sciences at the Czech Republic. So let me just turn it over to Viktoria. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you, John, very much for inviting me to this wonderful event. And as Sam said previously, he spent a lot of time thinking about the horizon, so I'm bringing one of those horizons to him and to you guys, the European one. The slide lovers, voila. Finally, between the morning and now, you waited patiently for the PowerPoint presentation to come up, and I'm bringing it to you. So hopefully it will it will help my talk, and it will also give you a little bit of the, the acronym situation sometimes in Europe can be difficult, but let's jump into that. So I was introduced already. I'm not going to spend much time about telling you who I am. You have that in your in the bios as well. How many of you have heard about Horizon 2020? Okay. So it's less than a half, so I think it's good for me to be here today. How many of you are collaborating or have received funding from Horizon 2020? Oh, okay, good. So it's room for improvement then. And hopefully next year, when I come up here and I'm going to ask the same question, I will see half of your hands up. This is actually a perfect time for me to be here because Horizon 2020 is a big EU program for research and innovation, actually one of the biggest in the world, with about 77 billion euros for the period of 7 years, so between 2014 and 2020. This period is divided into something called work programs. So the work programs are 3 within this Horizon 2020. The first one is done. The second one is finishing now at the end of 2017. And the third and the last one within Horizon 2020 will be the work program for 2018 and 2020. And the launch of that work program happened about a week ago. That means that right now, at this moment in time, we know already the calls for proposals that are going to be coming out within the next 3 years. So we know the dates, we know the deadlines, we know the topics. So there's a lot that we know that will be coming up in the next 3 years. To give you sort of a global idea about Horizon 2020, especially those of you who have heard about this program before, we divide it into 3 big priorities. We have excellent science, we have industrial leadership, and we have societal challenges. Horizon 2020 is a big program for research and innovation, tackles every single type of scientific domain that you can think of. And we have them either bottom-up approach for individual fellowships, or we have specific topics and domains that the European Union wants you to focus on. And those are the specific calls for proposals and the thematic areas which are then announced within each call when it's out. And you can see if it's something that you would like to collaborate in, if it's an area of research you're interested in, you have an expertise in, and you want to collaborate with European partners. Now, when I was preparing the presentation and I was thinking how to bring it closer to you, to researchers, to faculty, and how to give you an overarching idea about what Horizon 2020 is and what are the ways that you can actually participate in it, what's in it for you, how you can tap into funding. So I created my own little 4 ways of participation, which is nowhere really officially on the website, but after experiencing a lot of different talks and presentations and questions, I kind of divided it into these 4 ways of participation. So you can see the first one is the collaborative project. So those are the projects where you need to collaborate with European countries, with European entities, and that's where the US university or research institution comes into play. Then the second way of collaborating is through individual researchers. So we have a lot of different fellowships and grants where individual scientists, no matter of nationality and research field, can collaborate in, and those are the so-called bottom-up actions. And then within Horizon 2020, we have a platform called EURAXESS, and I'm one of the regional representatives here in North America. That's a wonderful resource for job search. It's a big database where you can find a lot of jobs and funding opportunities in Europe. So that's another way how you can be connected to Europe and where you can find a lot of different job vacancies in science, research, and innovation. Last but not least, number 4 is you can become an evaluator. The European Commission is always looking for experts to broaden the pool of experts that we have and that do evaluate the individual proposals. The proposals are evaluated by peer reviewing. So basically we have experts and we have evaluators around the world, not only based out of the European research area, but also outside. So I will leave you with a link. I'm not going to elaborate on that more, but that's the link. If you're interested, you can register and you can become an evaluator. Now I'm going to show you one slide about the very general rules of participation, and I divided it into 2 parts. The first, the top of the slide is going to talk about the collaborative project, and the bottom of the slide will talk about the individual fellowships. Maybe, yes. So when it comes to collaborative project, as I mentioned before, that's one of the ways where U.S. Researchers can work with the European countries. So when we talk about collaboration, the minimum requirement is to have a consortium or a group of 3 European countries. And these countries can be either from the EU or can be the associated countries. So like we heard in the morning from Norway and Switzerland, those are not in the EU, but they're associated countries to Horizon 2020. So those are potential countries for you to collaborate with as well. The 4th can be a US entity, a legal entity. It can be a university, it can be a research institution, it can be industry, it can be a nonprofit, it can be a museum. So really any legal entity that is connected to your field of research. So the 3 countries is really the bare minimum. Usually the projects are bigger because they go for many, many years, and they also put into a lot of money. It can be anywhere between $1 million to 25 million euros per project, and basically that's why the projects tend to be bigger. I know a lot of international projects with US partners, Canadian partners, Japanese partners, etc., that have between 15 and 25 members. So basically, if you want to count how many you can have within a consortium, it doesn't really have a limit. It only has the bottom line. When it comes to individual fellowships, there it is a little bit different because basically you as a researcher will need one host institution within the European research area. You have a choice of 40 different European countries. You will have one project and one idea. So basically these individual fellowships are based obviously on excellence, and no matter what research domain you are in, you can always apply for an individual fellowship. If you're successful, you get 100% funding. Now let me show you the different areas within the 3 priorities. So I showed you that there is excellent science, there is industrial leadership and societal challenges, and I mentioned that there are every type of science or scientific domain represented under these 3 areas. So wanted to give you an idea what I meant by the different subtopics. To give you also a better understanding about where the individual fellowships fall under, those would be the first pillar, the excellent science. And I will talk a little bit about the ERC today, the European Research Council, and then the Marie Sklodowska-Curie actions that are fellowships for PhDs, postdocs, faculty, more experienced researchers. So the main collaborative pillar or priority area is really the societal challenges, and anything from social sciences, arts and humanities, to life sciences, physical sciences can be applied under this particular priority. As I also mentioned at the beginning, this is a good time for me to be here because the new work program is out and we already have some stats that come from the first 3.5 years of Horizon 2020. And I wanted to share those statistics with you because I think, especially looking at US as one of our most valuable partners in collaborative projects and individual fellowships for that matter, I wanted you to see how you are doing on the scale scale with other non-European countries. And I have to say very, very good. So in the first 3 years of Horizon 2020, the US is number one. Doesn't point. US is number one in the percentage when we compare it to other third countries, meaning countries that are outside of the European research area. So the US, as you can see, is followed by China, Brazil, Canada, Russia, etc. Now I'm going to show you another slide, also involving US participation, and this is for the period of 10 years. So we are going to look at a little bit bigger picture. The first 7 years were under the FP7, the Framework Program 7, and now the 3 years under Horizon 2020. Maybe it's a little bit too little, but the first one are the number of participations from the US. So under the Framework Program 7, so for the period of 7 years, there were 559 US participations under that framework program. And for the period of 3 years under Horizon 2020, there have been already 161 US participations, which is a good number. We still have 3 years to top FP7, and hopefully we are going to do that together. The second one is the total number of signed grant agreements involving the US. The grant agreement means that the US partner is a beneficiary of the project, meaning that they are getting funding from the European Union. So you can see that the number is still quite low for Horizon 2020. We are expecting more. And then the last number is the EU total financial contribution to US participation in million euros. So under FP7, it was almost 86 million euros. And so far under Horizon 2020 is about 28 million euros. And I want to tell you why it is maybe a little bit lower, because from Horizon 2020, when you are part of the collaborative projects, the US doesn't get funding by default. Because it belongs to the industrialized group of countries, so we are mainly expecting the US partner to bring matching funding to the particular project. But there are ways. There are exceptions to the rule, as always. So there are ways where the US partner can get funding also when they are part of a collaborative project. And usually if there is a bilateral agreement, if the call for proposal explicitly encourages the US partner to participate in a particular project, or without the US partner, the project would not be successful. So those are some of the ways when the US partners can get funding from Horizon 2020 for collaborative projects. Now, bear in mind that the individual fellowships are different. There, if you are a scientist applying for a Marie Curie grant or an ERC grant, if your project is successful, you get 100% funding no matter what nationality you are holding or what country you are based in right now. So that is the difference in between the individual fellowships where funding is available to everyone and collaborative projects where funding depends on the country you are representing. I have one more slide with the stats. Hopefully you can read this. I wanted to, again, summarize as much as possible from the first 3.5 years of Horizon 2020. So far, 159 projects have been granted to US participants, so that's a good number. 183 participations, so those are the entities, the different universities, the different nonprofits and research institutions that have participated or are participating in current projects. The EU contribution, you could see that, it's about 26 million euros, and the US contribution to the current projects is 16 million. So it's a little bit less than the EU contribution, but you can see that there is matching funding available from US partners. What also I wanted to point out at is the success rate of US participants in collaborative projects. It's 18%, which is a really, really good number because the overall success rate for Horizon 2020 collaborative projects is 15%. So the US is doing better than the average. The 5 EU countries that the US is most likely or most collaborating with for the moment being, we have the UK, Germany, France, Italy, and Spain. So most of those countries are here with us today, and you can definitely dig into more details in the afternoon. And I also listed some of the most successful US institutions just for your information. Now, let me jump into the work program for 2018 and 2020. So the last one before we are going to extend to FP9, as Sam mentioned. I don't know if it's going to be called FP9 or Horizon 2030, or someone is going to come up with a different name. So let's see, for now it's FP9. So for the next and last 3 years of Horizon 2020, we are looking into a budget of 30 billion euros, which is about 35 billion US dollars. Now, you probably know, especially those of you that have some contact or know a little bit about Horizon 2020, that there are specific research areas which are the most important, or where the EU seeks US partners or collaboration with US partners. And I'm going to show you the areas that are going to be on the top of the list for the next 3 years. So we have marine and Arctic research stays on the top of the agenda. We have health, which has always been a very, very important collaborative topic between the EU and the US. And the health area, I'm going to stop here just for a second. The health area is the only area between the EU and the US where there is a bilateral agreement between these two entities, which means that if you have a collaborative project within health research and it's successful, you are going to receive funding by default, because there is an agreement between the US and the EU. So that's so far the only area where, if you're successful within a collaborative project, your entity, US entity, will get funding. Number 3 is transport. Then there is energy and nanosafety. So these are the areas, the focus areas that the EU would like to collaborate with US entities. Obviously, any other research domain that you would like to be part of, you are welcome to collaborate, because Horizon 2020, as we all know, is open to the world and open to different scientific domains. But these are the ones we are going to focus on in the next 3 years. I'm going to also show you 2 examples of the calls that are going to come out in 2018 and 2019. So, for example, there will be a nanosafety call next year with a budget of 28 million euros. And there will be a call in 2019 on automated vehicles with about a 30 million euro funding. So there is something called a roadmap, S&T roadmap, between the EU and the US, which was just a week ago or a couple of days ago updated to the new work program. It means that you can see the specific calls and specific topics that are specifically encouraging US participation. And I counted them, there are 28 of them for the next 3 years. So if you look at this roadmap in the annex, you will see all the call topics and all the different areas where the EU would like to have US partners on board, and those are also the topics where you have a bigger chance to receive funding from the EU, because they have been identified already for you within that document. Okay, so this was the collaborative project, the one way of you being part of Horizon 2020. Now, I would like to give you a very quick rundown. Do I still have? Yes. of the individual fellowships for researchers and scientists in the audience, again, of any nationality and any research field. So here, I'm not going to talk about if you're eligible or not eligible for funding. Now you know you are. If your project is successful, you can get 100% funding. So let me start with the Marie Sklodowska-Curie actions. Do I have any fellows in the audience by any chance? Oh, okay. Current? Previously? 2002, 2003. Okay. And yourself? Okay, fantastic. Did you come to the US or you went to Europe? I went to Europe. Okay. You came to the, okay, fantastic. So we have two examples of, one is a European fellowship and the other one is a global fellowship. So what is the Marie Curie? I'm going to use the abbreviation of MSCA, just not to break my tongue. After our Polish colleagues decided to put her maiden name into the title, which is perfectly fine. You just need a language course to pronounce it, so I'll stick to Marie Curie or MSCA. By the way, I don't know, maybe many of you noticed yesterday was the 150th birthday of Marie Curie, so that's actually something that I was not completely aware of, but yesterday when I was going through my Twitter feed, everyone was tweeting about Marie Curie and how fantastic she was, and I could not agree more with that because I think she was a fantastic physicist. And to Nobel. Voila, exactly. So I think we should definitely honor her name and her legacy. So Marie Curie is under Horizon 2020 as well. Just to kind of give you, there's Horizon 2020, the different 3 priorities. Marie Curie is under the Excellent Science pillar, with a budget of about 6 billion euros for the period of 7 years. So what are the key advantages of the Marie Curie fellowships? For me, what is it's great and fantastic about these fellowships is that, first of all, it's open to any nationality, open to any research field, and specifically it's a bottom-up approach, which means we are not going to tell you what topic to work on. We are not going to tell you what scientific domain you should be focusing on, but it's your research and your idea that matters. So we are going to fund any idea that is going to be excellent, any project that will be to the standards of high quality, high innovation, high excellence. So you are the ones who are going to decide about your topic. We have already funded 15,000 non-European fellows, so that's just to demonstrate how global this fellowship is. Mobility is one of the main key words when we talk about Marie Curie. It means that you have to be mobile. You cannot stay in your country. If you are if you are in Europe, you can change countries. You can go from one European country to another, or you can choose to go to any non-European country of your interest. You can come to the US, you can go to Canada, Japan, China, etc. If you are currently in the US, we would encourage you to go to Europe, of course. We are not going to tell you to go to another country, but you have 40 different countries. Hey, it's a lot of choices out there. So you definitely have a lot fantastic research centers and centers of excellence in all our European research area. Innovation, I wanted to also point out that part. So we are not only telling you or suggesting you to go to a university, but we would love you to do a research somewhere else as well, if your area of expertise allows that. Meaning, do research at a nonprofit, do research at a museum, or at a SME or a startup or a private company. So we are definitely encouraging you to collaborate with non-academic institutions as well, and the Marie Curie Fellowships are the perfect vehicle for you to do that. Now, there are 4 different actions under the Marie Curie. There are the individual fellowships, which are for PhDs or the people that have had 4 years of full-time research experience. So if you do not necessarily hold a PhD diploma, because some fields, some domains do not have a PhD diploma, but you can show that you have been working in research in your field full-time for 4 years, you are eligible to apply for the individual fellowship. And I have a specific slide for that, so I'll skip that right now. The RISE Research and Innovation Staff Exchange, that's mainly, again, for U.S. universities, U.S. institutions that would like to create a consortium with European partners and exchange staff. By staff, there can be researchers, innovators, research administrators, entrepreneurs, so really anybody, technicians, anybody that is involved with a particular project. Again, all of them are bottom-up, so we are not topic related here. The ITN, the Innovative Training Network, that's mainly for undergraduates that would like to do a PhD in Europe. So we do encourage also people, students, that would like to do their full doctoral degree in Europe. That would be the action they would look into. And the way they look into that, there is a website, either EURAXESS or the Marie Curie, and then they search for a particular field they're interested in. So there is already a field that is out there, a topic that the institution is looking for, particular expertise, people that would like to do a PhD in that field. So that would be the ITN and the co-fund. Those are the co-funding of national, regional, or international projects where the European Commission co-funds about 40% to increase the number of recruited PhDs and postdocs. So that would be also for individuals that would like to go for a couple of months or years to Europe. Now, as I promised, I have a slide on individual fellowships, especially for those of you that are interested in that. So as I mentioned, it is for so-called experienced researchers, so you have to have a PhD or at least 4 years of research experience. Which is new compared to the previous framework programs is that you are eligible to opt for something called a secondment. I don't know if that word makes sense for my American audience. It's more like maybe a placement. You can do anything between 3 and 6 months. So the duration of these fellowships is 2 years if you go for a European fellowship. So European is going towards Europe. You can go for 1 or 2 years max. Even sometimes I tell people here because they don't think about that or they don't see it behind the lines or in between the lines. If you have a year of a sabbatical and you are looking into an opportunity to do research in Europe, I would encourage you to do a Marie Curie individual fellowship for a year. So there's a bottom line, as I mentioned, the PhD or 4 years of research experience, but there's no limit in age or experience. So you can be more experienced, you can have more years in research, and you would still be eligible to apply for a Marie Curie individual fellowship. So 1 or 2 years, and then the 3 or 6 months optional secondments, which, as I said, you can basically have a host institution in Europe, and then you can choose another institution that you would like to spend a couple months in, be it again private sector or nonprofit, but have to be also within the European research area. It's optional, you don't have to. You can spend 1 or 2 years at your host institution, and no one is going to say anything. So with the global fellowships, you can host a fellow at your institution. So for example, if you have a lab, if you have a group here, a research group, where you are thinking about hosting a fellow, that's a way to bring a European to your lab for no cost. Because basically they will apply for funding and they will spend those 2 years here at your institution, and you can have someone almost for free from Europe. The mobility rule, of course, it's very important. That's almost the only second eligibility rule after the PhD, is that you cannot apply to the country where you have been living or working for more than 12 months in the past 3 years. So if you comply with that rule, you can go basically anywhere in Europe or other way around, anywhere in the world. Now I'm going to show you the financial aspect, which is also very interesting and very important. As I talked about the IF, so those would be the individual fellowships for the postdocs or sabbatical or more experienced researchers. You can see that on your right-hand side is the money that would go to the researcher, and then on the left-hand side is the money that goes to the host institution. So basically it is definitely a win-win situation, and these are amounts per month. And these are amounts, gross amounts, which means that the institution you are going to be employed by will deduct Social Security, health insurance, and taxes from this salary remuneration that you will be receiving. So it is definitely a nice one. Now, in terms of the calls, there's always one call per year. So now that we have the work program out, you can see the calls for 2018. If you are thinking about an individual fellowship, they will open in April 2018 and close in September. So the 2017 call closed in September about a month and a half ago. So unfortunately, that's already done. And my last slide about the Marie Curie is again a little bit of statistics, so you can see how many US participants have taken advantage of the Marie Curie, and I have to say a lot. It's very, very popular both ways, either Americans going to Europe or Europeans coming to the US. US is the #1 country where the global fellowships are placed. So it is still a very popular destination. So just a few numbers. Total of 250 US researchers have participated in Marie Curie actions, and those can be either doing a doctoral training in Europe or doing a postdoc within the individual fellowships. And John is coming up, probably already trying to tell me I should get off the stage. So I wanted to also tell you about the European Research Council grants, but I think I've taken most of my time already. So then I will give you just a teaser. These are excellent, groundbreaking grants, innovative, between 1 to 3 million euros for a period of 5 years. So for principal investigators that would like to open their own lab in Europe. And if you're interested in them, then I can definitely talk a little more about them in the afternoon session where we have the breakout, and we can dig a little deeper into those grants. And let me just, you don't see anything of this? And then, yeah, I will leave you with some links as well. Once you receive the presentation, I'm sure they will distribute it. And then with that, thank you so much for your attention and for being here.